From the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was one of the many prophets that warned his people about doom and gloom that was to come, or what they should be doing that they weren't. And this was, again, one of those instances. It was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. At that time, the army of the king of Babylon was holding Jerusalem under siege. Jeremiah was shut up in the jail in the royal palace. Zedekiah, king of Judah, had locked him up, complaining, "How dare you preach, saying, 'God says, I'm warning you, I will hand this city over to the king of Babylon, and he will take it over. Zedekiah, king of Judah, will be handed over right along with the city. He will be handed over to the king of Babylon and forced to face the music. He'll be hauled off to Babylon, where he'll stay until I deal with him. Fight against the Babylonians all you want. It won't get you anywhere.'" Jeremiah said, "God's word came to me, prepare yourself. Hanamel, your uncle Shallum's son, is on his way to see you. He is going to say, 'Buy my field in Anathoth. You have the legal right to buy it.' And sure enough, just as God had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me while I was in jail and said, 'Buy my field in Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin, for you have a legal right to keep it in the family. Buy it, take it over.' That did it. I knew it was God's message." Now, one thing you need to know, this field in Anathoth was under the control of the Babylonians. So it was not a piece of free and clear land. So I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel. I paid him 17 silver shekels. I followed all the proper procedures. In the presence of witnesses, I wrote out the bill of sale, sealed it, and weighed out the money on the scales. Then I took the deed of purchase, the sealed copy that contained the contract and its conditions, and also the open copy, and gave them to Baruch. All this took place in the presence of my cousin Hanamel and the witnesses who had signed the deed, as the Jews who were at the jail that day looked on. Then in front of them all I told Baruch, "These are orders from God of hosts, the God of Israel. Take these documents, both deeds, and put them for safekeeping in a pottery jar. For the God of hosts says, life is going to return to normal. Homes and fields and vineyards are again going to be bought in this country." It's funny how when you think of a concept or you hear a word, all of a sudden you hear it everywhere. And when I started thinking about the word transition, of course, I heard it in a lot of different places. I heard that we're transitioning from winter into spring. I know of a transgender person who is transitioning from male to female. There's an organization called Professionals in Transition that helps the under and unemployed prepare for new jobs. The clients of Interfaith Hospitality, which this congregation assists in serving, are transitioning from homelessness to home owners. Just this week, I received an email entitled Transitional Ministry. The definition of transition, according to, of course, dictionary.com, says movement, passage, or change from one position, state, stage, subject, concept, etc. to another. In other words, it means change. Transition is really just another word to disguise this word, this concept, experience that we don't really care to deal with, and that is change. Yet we are always being affected by change, just as the song stated. Changes in relationship status, changes in our financial resources, changes in our health, changes in location where we live. The only thing that's constant in our world is change. Every moment differs from the last. Every instant brings something new. At least when it's a conscious decision that we make, this change that's going to happen, we feel like at least it was our choice. But when change is thrust upon us by necessity or circumstance, then we become uneasy and anxious and even fearful at times. Change pushes us into situations where we have little or no control. Change shatters the illusion that we ever did have control. We like to hang on to the past, living in familiar surroundings and maintaining our comfort zone. Going forward overwhelms us, so we attempt to keep everything the same as long as we can, resisting change and potential new opportunities. We attempt to hold off the inevitable with what one of my friends calls magical thinking, just hoping that miraculously whatever it is will just straighten out on its own accord and require nothing of me. These types of behavior, we well know, tend to paralyze us and keep us stuck right where we are. We stay where we're comfortable, preferring, as I said in the little write-up, the devil you know to the devil you don't know. We may not be happy. Our physical, emotional, or spiritual well-being may be threatened, but at least we know what we're dealing with, and we know what to expect. In these instances, change carries a negative connotation. But in our defense, you can use this with someone else, it's not our fault. In his book, Just One Thing, Developing a Buddha Brain One Practice at a Time, author Rick Hansen states that our brains have a built-in negativity bias. Now, how's that? It's not your fault. That's your brain. That's the way it works. This negativity bias, he said, was developed because our ancestors dodged sticks and chased carrots over millions of years of evolution, and the sticks had greater urgency and impact on survival. He cites a number of studies that affirm this scientific theory, and here's just a couple of the points he lifted up. The brain generally reacts more to a negative stimulus than to an equally positive one. That hardly seems fair. Animals, including us, typically learn faster from pain than from pleasure. Painful experiences are usually more memorable than pleasurable ones. It's a setup. Hansen goes on to say, in your own mind, what do you usually think at the end of the day? Do you think about the 50 things that went right? Or the one thing that went wrong? And I love this. Such a good picture. In effect, he says, the brain is like Velcro for negative experiences, but Teflon for positive ones. That shades our implicit memory, your underlying feelings and expectations, beliefs, inclinations, and mood in an increasingly negative direction. But according to him, we don't have to accept this bias. We can overcome it by what he calls tilting toward the good. He goes on to explain this in his book, but that's a sermon for another day, or you can read the book. The tendency toward a negative bias affects not just our individual lives. We tend to forget that it affects our communal lives as well. You are probably experiencing some of this right now as you prepare to move to another place of worship. As you watch items disappear as they get packed up and taken home, and it will be even more visible next week when the big packing starts. All of this is a harbinger of things to come, signaling yet another change for this congregation. I have had a really special relationship with all of you and members of this congregation in the past for over 20 years. I entered seminary as a UU seminarian, and I preached at Murray Grove in the 90s. I worshiped and preached at Berkeley Center. I participated in the installation of one of your ministers. We shared worship space at the United Church of Christ. I've preached here, and, oh yes, I have shared my wife with you for many years. I have experienced your journey and witnessed this congregation's adaptability and resourcefulness. But this move introduces a new dynamic that you have never experienced before. For 5 years, this space has been your home. There was a different quality to your life as you worshiped together here and had various activities. This space offered new meanings and experiences because it was yours. No sharing with someone else, working around the schedule of another organization, not making to do with a preset configuration, but setting up the space the way you want it. All of this makes your move just a little more poignant. Some of you may be mourning the loss of the only true home you ever had. You may be mourning the loss of having a central location where all your activities can happen. Others may be fearful, not knowing how things will work out. Some of you may be resigned to, it is what it is. Still others may be excited, seeing this as the final step to your permanent home. Your emotions, I am sure, run the gamut, and I know I haven't touched them all. My concern is that at some level, many of you probably see having to move from this location as a failure. Because as human beings, don't we have a tendency to judge everything as it's a success or it's a failure? There doesn't seem to be any middle ground. But how can you judge a success, this move as a success or failure, when you have no idea what the future is going to bring? Because this is only one of many steps that you have taken along the way. And we can't judge them individually because they are part of a whole. There's a very old Sufi story about a man whose son captured a strong, beautiful, wild horse. And all the neighbors told the man how fortunate he was. The man patiently replied, "We will see." One day the horse threw his son and he broke his leg. And all the neighbors told the man how cursed he was that the son had ever found that horse. Again the man answered, "We will see." Soon after the son broke his leg, soldiers came into the village and took away all the able-bodied young men, but his son was spared. When the man's friends told him how lucky he was that the leg was broken, the man would only say, "We'll see." We never truly know each step that we take. Is it a good step? Is it a bad step? We don't know. But we often prejudge it before we really experience it. And that is where we sometimes get ourselves in trouble. One of the classic stories of a people living through change after change is that of the Israelites, who I referenced in the book, The Reading from Jeremiah. Their story is well known, even if you're a lifetime you, I think. From the slavery in Egypt to 40 years wandering in the desert, they went from their own kingdom and king to 2 kingdoms and kings, which later became no kingdom and no kings, as they were defeated by the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Romans. As a matter of fact, their hometown and temple in Jerusalem was destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, and captured and recaptured 44 times. What kept them going? Why didn't they just throw their hands up and say, "That's enough, I give up"? Because they believed that they had a mission, something important to do. They believed that they had something to offer the world, and they were passionate about it. They faced each new situation and moved on, not without grumbling or fears or regret, but they moved on because they were invested in the future. In the passage from Jeremiah, they have been defeated. Is this bothering anybody else? Can I turn it off? I'll talk loud. Hopefully it'll be enough.
It's on. It's on. The red light's on.
Is that off? Is that off now?
Oh, went off?
Oh, maybe it's not this. I don't know. Well, let's see. So this passage in Jeremiah, I explained, they were under siege from the Babylonians for the second time. The first time they were able to resist them because they had help from Egypt. This time they had no help. The Babylonians were ready to overrun them and take over their land and take them back to Babylonia. But we hear Jeremiah buying back land that is behind the enemy lines. Maybe it's me.
You're an electric speaker.
Obviously not that.
Power to the sound system a minute.
It's the other sound system.
How do you, can you turn it off, the other side?
Let's try this. Okay, so Jeremiah buys this land behind enemy lines. He makes it very public so that everybody left in Jerusalem knew what he was doing. Money changed hands, a deed was drawn up, and people witnessed this seemingly foolish purchase. Who buys land that you can't go to? But far from being foolish, Jeremiah was sending a message to the people of Jerusalem. His purchase of the field in Ananoth was a sign that even when war seemed hopeless and the end seemed imminent, that once again the day would come when the descendants of Jeremiah and his clan would buy and sell houses and vineyards and fields in Ananoth. His purchase, which was judged foolish, was a sign of hope, a belief that they had a future and that they would eventually return to their own land. I'd like to read a passage from a book called A Holy Curiosity by Bruce T. Marshall, who is a UU minister, and he has this experience to relate. I found hope articulated at a meeting in which the speaker was a retired minister. He had successfully served a number of large congregations, published books, and was much loved and respected throughout the denomination. He attended that meeting to share thoughts and responses to his recently published book. But the memory I left this meeting with was not of my distinguished colleague as an author or as a minister. What stuck in my mind was a presentation he gave about the activity he had undertaken in his retirement, tree farming. I left that meeting with hope that came from his stories of raising trees. He showed us a slide of a tree growing in his forest, a big tree that looked mature to my untrained eyes. He said, "This is what we are working toward. The tree is tall and straight. It is not crowded by other trees, but it doesn't take up too much space of its own either. When the time comes for it to be cut, this tree will be valuable. When we asked, will that be? Oh, he replied, in about 50 years. 50 years? I have a hard time waiting for tomatoes to ripen. But 50 years? He showed us another picture. This featured very young trees that were just emerging from the forest floor. He said, for these to grow, we have to clear the less desirable trees, make space, provide light, and ensure they have moisture. When will they be ready for harvest? The audience asked. He replied, well, you know, things happen slowly in Maine. I'd say they'd be ready in about 80 or 100 years. Marshall goes on to relate to us that this man who was speaking to them was in his late 70s or 80s. For him to be so engrossed in an activity whose end he will never see is a statement of hope. It is a witness that life matters, even if we won't be able to see the results of our own efforts. Land purchased in enemy territory, a sign of hope that all is not lost. Planting trees that this man will never see, a sign of hope to the people around him, the people he spoke to, that life matters, that what he's doing matters. Signs to us that even when we feel what we're doing doesn't count because change has reared its ugly head yet once again, we do make a difference. There is hope. And so I leave you this morning with this question. What can each of you do individually to signal hope to the rest of your congregation? What can you do? Now I think is the time when perhaps some of you can look at your finances and realize that you could provide some more support as a sign of hope that you are invested in this congregation. Look at your talents and your skills. What can you offer the members of this congregation as a sign of hope that this congregation is as strong and vibrant as ever? Now is the time for each of you to invest in your future, in the future promise of this congregation as you move to yet another space. As you leave today, I ask you, what will your field in Ananoth be? What will you plant for the future? Blessed be.
Blessed be.